Our first talk for today is a conversation between Ulrich Obrist and Rashid Rana. Ulrich Obrist is co-director of exhibitions and programs and director of international projects at the Serpentine Gallery in London. And Rashid Rana, who is an artist who was born in Lahore, Pakistan, received his Bachelor of Fine Arts from the National College of Arts in Lahore and a Master of Fine Arts from the Massachusetts College of Art in Boston. He is one of the pioneers behind the School of Visual Arts, Beacon House National University in Lahore, where he also acts as an associate professor. Ladies and gentlemen, Ulrich Obrist and Rashid Rana.
Thank you so much to Antonia, of course, to Shumon, to Tirad, and to Claudia for the invitation to speak here. It's a great, great pleasure and privilege that we can continue this interview, which we started actually earlier, a couple of months ago, with Rashid Rana in Paris. And as David Sylvester said, the wonderful things about having conversations with artists is that it becomes more and more interesting. He spoke to David Sylvester dozens and dozens of times, so I'm very, very glad that we can do here a next chapter in this evolutive interview. And a very warm welcome to Rashid Rana.
Thank you.
Now, one of the things I wanted to begin with the beginning is that when one asks actually scientists, very often they talk about their epiphany, their kind of invention. No? When Mandelbrot told me about how he invented fractals. And with artists, very often there is also epiphanies, there is inventions. And the first time I saw your work, it was the pixelated photographic works, which also have to do with the notion of archive. And I was very much wondering how you discovered this pixelation, how this invention came about, what triggered this epiphany?
Well, anything that would come close to calling it epiphany in my work would be my work called I Love Miniature. And that's the work which was part of an exhibition, curated exhibition called Around Miniatures. For those who don't know, contemporary Pakistani art from the 1990s, contemporary miniature painting has been the most significant trend to come out. And but there was a lot of if I may use the word, bad wagon phenomena around it. And I thought there were a lot of interesting work was produced under that label, neo miniature or contemporary miniature. But there was a lot of exoticization so I thought of making a work which would deal with that notion in a different way. I took a portrait of a Mughal emperor and then tried to make it with the help of miniaturized billboards from the city where I live. And so the experience, my immediate visual experience of the city and images around me, I reduced it to smaller miniature-sized images and put them together to make that portrait. And that's how the first photo mosaic that I've ever made came about. It is a significant work because it kind of provided a framework to my varied interest and diverse interests that I have been trying to deal with in my practice. And from that point onwards, it became a great conceptual and formal device to deal with that diversity of ideas. So I would very much think that that is one work which would come close to epiphany if I have to compare myself with the scientist.
And when we spoke in Paris, I asked you about your influences, and I was obviously wondering, if people like Jacques Clos or Franz Gärtner, even Bechtle were important. And you said that they weren't really your role models, that somehow photorealism wasn't really what inspired you. It was somehow much more other influences. You mentioned Cindy Sherman and Artaud and lots of different things. And I was wondering, because here in the Global Art Forum in Dubai, in previous years, very often it's been fascinating in terms of a protest against forgetting to remember not only Western influences, but also to remember pioneers from the past. It was, for example, here that we spoke to several younger artists who all said we should revisit Etel Adnan, we should revisit Monia Sharoudi Famanian, so pioneers of art practices from the Middle East, from generations of the 50s or 60s. And I was wondering if you had any of such influences from Pakistan or from the region, heroes, inspirations who inspired you early in your trajectory.
Definitely. Zuhur al-Akhlaq is the first name which I must mention. A legendary artist from Pakistan who not many people know about and his practice, and we hope that in the near future more exhibitions are held of his work and his practice becomes familiar to the audience who's now following contemporary Pakistani art, and they could see that where are the connections if they want to trace it back in terms of history, short history of art that have been produced in the region where I come from. Comparing myself or talking about influences from the West, this is a topic that can be really expanded into many sessions because we do have a very strange relationship with the Western art. I totally admire it before you going somewhere else because I feel, not for the political correctness, but I feel that just like democracy, if there's a democracy in Libya 2 months from now, it will take its time to develop into an institution. Similarly, art, the way we understand it now in contemporary times, it has a whole history of how it has evolved in the West. So full credit to that. And these art is an institution and a discipline which has developed and evolved in the West. And as a result, lots of interesting works have been produced. A lot of, if I again use the scientific analogy, lots of inventions have been made which would not be possible overnight. Having said that, the comparisons which are made, such as Damien Hirst of Delhi, often about Subodh, or subcontinental Duchamp, that I'm very about. We do have an interesting relationship. We do get inspired. But I think the complexity of this relationship probably needs another session. Yes, I do admire Chuck Close, not as much. In my work, probably the development of photography as a medium is something that I'm really interested in. I ended up using photo content in my work incidentally, in a way. I was trained as a painter, and in the late 90s, I started making works which relied heavily on photographic found references. And so I used to manipulate them in computer, take a printout, and then produce them on large canvases with the help of assistants. And then later on, I thought I can just simply bypass that process and use a found photographic imagery as a major tool or medium for my practice. But in the course of doing so, I discovered that photography is something which is more fascinating as a subject rather than just being used as a tool. So now the work that I'm making for the last few months explores that dimension of photography. And then, of course, all the names that you have mentioned come into discussion and comes to mind when we talk about that reference. For example, photography changed the face of art in the late 19th century. The role of artists changed. But it took about 80, 90 years for photography to become a subject as part of the photorealist movement, which I think is quite underrated. And then we see, of course, coming of people like Sidney Sherman and Thomas Demand and Struth and all these people who make use of this medium just the way a painter from our times would do that. So all of these things are connections and inspirations as much as which it would be for an artist living in the West.
Now, it's interesting to talk a little bit more about photography, because if one looks at your work over the years, there is an incredible encyclopedia of photographic images. I mean, thousands, 10,000, 100,000, maybe millions of photographs which pop up in these pixelated images. And Leon Golub, the late American painter who was a very good friend of mine, always said that we're living in a time of so many images, photographic images, that they almost become biological. And I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about that aspect of the work, about the archive, because you told me in our previous conversation, very often it has to do with mapping. You map cities, you map Lahore, but you map also in concentric circles bigger geographies, and you have mappings of entire streets. I mean, Dieter Roth once did this piece where he, photographed all the houses in Reykjavik, and there is something of that kind of encyclopedic endeavor in the work. Can you tell us about Encyclopedia, Photography, and Archive?
Before I talk about this aspect, for those who are not familiar with my work, the presence of lots of thousands of tiny images within the large macro image, they're often about the invisible audience from the regions which are now becoming part of the world art scene. Okay, so to comment specifically the question that you asked, I must confess here that initially I didn't start off with that understanding that the images, the mappings, and the thousands of images of houses that I'm using from Lahore or all other encyclopedic collection of images that have come into play into my work. I didn't start off with that intention, and I met Hans in 2007. And he said, have you considered looking at as an archive of a time? And that really made me think. And the work that I'm doing presently, especially some of the works from most recent language series, they have to do with that notion that you made me think at that point. And it's developing into a whole body of work where that archival aspects is coming into play. For example, this work, which you might see tomorrow at the work that I'm showing in the booth, and also at Listen Gallery next month, Language Series 1, it has got almost all the images and of the text that you see in the city where I live, Lahore, in terms of the signboards of shops and businesses, all kind of text that you see in the city that I have managed to collect photographically with the help of my team. Yes, it has become an important aspect of my practice.
And these new works, which have a lot to do with the city as a text, make also think of Michel Butor, the great French novelist and author of the Nouveau Roman, who wrote this beautiful little book called City as a Text, which inspired generations of artists, and also Dan Graham. But that also brings us to the question of the connection to architecture, the connection to urbanism, the connection to design. Because, as you said once, it's not so much a question of medium. You were trained as a painter, and you made actually pictures which for you are paintings, but then it has evolved, and you said that you can use paint, but it went beyond painting. And I remember also one of the first time I saw your work, it went more and more from 2 dimensions, also in 3 dimensions. It went into spaces. One could almost say rooms, and maybe buildings, maybe architecture, maybe cities. What about your architectural projects? What about your rooms into which one can walk? And do you have any kind of unrealized projects on a bigger scale? Do you have plans for entire buildings or cities?
Yeah, imagination has no limit. You always need patronage and resources. So there are ideas and projects in the pipeline which might become or which might start flirting with architecture. Let's see. Maybe later this year.
And do you have any other unrealized projects? Because, Alighiero Boetti always told me we should think about artists' practice, not only what can happen, but also their dreams. And do you have projects from the past which were censored, or which were too big to be realized, or too small to be realized? Also, maybe projects you didn't dare to do, because there's obviously also self-censorship, things one doesn't dare to do.
Exactly, that's what I was going to mention. Coming from Pakistan, it's more about self-censorship than censorship itself. But not really. I mean, any project that I found different ways to go around and find creative solutions to those limitations with regards to censorship and self-censorship. Friends must be familiar with my Veil series and some other works. About unrealized projects, not as in the sense that I have resolved everything on paper and it only needed an execution, but in terms of some of the ideas which needed a lot of patronage and support on some massive scale. Let's see, I'm in conversation with a few friends, and few things might work out in times to come.
Maybe one more
But
question. Yeah.
to answer you more specifically, it might be just an extension of my photo sculptures, which some of those you will see in the booth at Kamold and Chatterjee and Lal, and which I have been trying to dealing with since 2007 and trying to find right kind of way of executing them, which luckily I've found most recently. But they are wanting to be the works want to be materialized at some other scale, some architectural scale. So those are the things which are in the pipeline.
Now, as it was mentioned in the introduction, and that's something Shumon Bazar pointed out a lot in preparing these panels of the next couple of days, there is this interesting connection not only to fashion, but this idea of building different kind of bridges. Félix Fénéon talked in the early 20th century not about this connection of art to a public, but he said it's about throwing many passerelles. No passerelles, what would it be in English? Kind of smaller bridges. No, many bridges to other fields, other disciplines, to other publics.
Yeah.
And you make many of these bridges, and I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about that, about the connection to these different publics,
Right.
and maybe also the connection to fashion, because there are rumors that you somehow have a very close connection to almost your own tailor.
Connection sounds very scandalous. With my tailor, my wife isn't here, so. All right. No, I mean, but I think it's a very important aspect that you mentioned about building bridges. In the early 90s, I was quite happy to make work which could only be appreciated by an audience of 5 people. And I thought maybe that is an important thing, that fewer the audience is, better the work is. And I soon realized that I was quite silly. And it's very important to engage more and more people, and who can relate to your work, who can enjoy your work, and then it can work at different levels. So with that conscious shift in my approach, I became much more interested in the broad visual culture and popular culture and familiar imagery. And with that desire, gradually, the way as my practice evolved, led to the work that you are familiar now. Though from some cynical circles, I do time to time get some feedback that there is some element of spectacle in my work, and which itself, it's quite misleading a word, and has negative connotations. No, but this is, from my part, it was a conscious decision that I'm not going to make work for 5 people, and I want to make work which has engagement, which offers engagement to a wider audience. And so I do respect and believe in the smaller bridges, whether that is from the immediate world around us, which is the design, whether graphic design or product design, and fashion design. And fashion, talking of fashion, I don't, a lot of people, especially from the same circles that I mentioned, might think of fashion as a frivolous activity, but it is such an important part of our life, and the way we, we deal with it, engage with it every moment that we live. So I don't see any reason why it should not be an influence for the artist, whoever thinks that it can fit into their practice at some point of their career.
Now
And about my tailor, yes, I do have a great interest in clothing, not so much for the last 5 years since I've been too involved in my work, but prior to that I have had friends in Lahore who have been designing clothes for me. And since Lahore and Saudi Arabia in general is a kind of place where we live so many times and eras all at the same time. You may be at a location where an audience and people you're engaging with may be just like an audience here, and then you step out, and then you're maybe in another time and era. You would find a latest model Mercedes-Benz along with a 2,000 years old model of a chariot side by side on the same road. So that's a culture and place where you often has to shift gears mentally, in terms of your communication, and the communication that you do through other aspect of your personality, such as clothing. So I talked to my friend Ali Khan, the designer who's now living in New York, and I'm still searching for another tailor. So I said, okay, this is my dilemma. What do I do? I'm now dealing with I've got an administrative position at BNU because I was one of the founding members there. So I was no longer a hipster, just sort of teacher at an art school with a ripped-off jeans, so I had to meet with people who were from other fields of life and at this university. So I said, what do I do? These people was going to make, and I don't want to propagate the stereotype of an artist that an artist is always wearing this kind of rough, tough clothes. So, and I want to be able to shift different to different personas. So he said, okay, fine, I'll design something. Maybe this is a simple white shirt, and we'll attach a loop from here to here, which will make it look funky. When you go into a meeting with this ex-Prime Finance Minister, who's our Vice Chancellor, you can just unzip it and take it off, and then you go into that meeting. So I have been involved in that kind of experimentation. And prior to that, in the mid-90s, when I went back to Pakistan after spending a few years in Boston, so I went back, and immediately I discovered that a lot of people have a lot of say in what you wear in your clothing, especially as an artist, that if you're wearing something which doesn't fit in the stereotype of an artist, they will immediately say, why are you wearing jacket? Why are you looking like this? So to to achieve greater freedom, what I did, I played with my appearances, and I changed my personas and my looks and my clothes on daily basis. One day I would go to the art school as a banker with a suit and tie, and the other day I will go in shalwar kameez, and maybe third day I go in some other kind of attire. So it was quite a fun exercise. I didn't think I was making art or doing something of that sort of performative art. I wish I had documented it, but maybe that's the fun part of it, because I didn't have any such burden to having to make art.
It's interesting because I just spoke last week with a longer interview with Zaha Hadid, and she was mentioning as well a whole period in her life where she actually designed, inspired by Rodchenko and inspired by Russian constructivists. She designed on an almost daily basis her own clothes, a completely own sort of series of clothes which changed every day. Now, talking about bridges, one other thing which is important in your practice is this idea of curating, and you've curated a very important show of contemporary art from Pakistan for the Devi Foundation, and told me that this experience actually was a very important one for you, and it would be great to hear more about this, about curating as a sort of a bridge building. And obviously I'm very curious to hear you talk more about contemporary art from Pakistan, how you selected this exhibition, and particularly also about Lahore, because I have the feeling that whenever I am somehow researching art in the Middle East, and particularly whenever I meet artists from Pakistan and also a lot of artists in India, are always mentioning the Lahore miracle. It is considered clearly to be the leading art school in the subcontinent. Many Indian artists told me there isn't such an art school on that level in India. You've been very involved with this art school, so it would be great to hear a little bit from you about the Lahore miracle, why you think that happened in Lahore, why the school is so important, and this exhibition at the Devi Foundation.
First, to comment on art academia in Pakistan. I have been part of both Indian and Pakistani art scene. I've been fortunate to be part of both scenes in the last 10 years. And often one is asked to make comparisons, just like a cricket match, if who's winning, either India or Pakistan. But if I see any difference, I think it's the art academia which kind of separates the two. If I have to think hard, then I would say it's art academia. So academia in Pakistan has played a significant role in whatever we have achieved in that tiny art scene so far. And people who have been engaged in teaching, and then they are the unsung heroes. First National College of Arts, and then being a state-run school, and then with its own baggage of history and notion of tradition. Then there was absolutely a need for something new to arrive. And I was, again, fortunate to get an opportunity to be involved in designing of the curriculum for this upcoming school that you're mentioning. Beacon House National University has got a school called School of Visual Arts and Design, which to me, I may have my own bias, but to me is the highlight of the last 5 years of contemporary Pakistani art, in terms of the teacher who were involved there and the student who have come out in the last 3-4 years. Together they have come up with a new vision that unburdens you from the baggage of history and tradition, and it gives you a new perspective to what transnational viewership is all about. So I'm fortunate that I'm part of that whole movement, and it has made a lot of difference. Talking about curating a show, I have worked hard on getting some place for myself or recognition to be called as an artist. And suddenly, when this show was appreciated, so the artist Rashid was jealous of this curator Rashid. So I don't know if I want to pursue that career, but as a one-off experience, it was a great experience for me when my friend Anupam Podar, based in Delhi, he has a famous foundation called Devi Foundation, Anupam and Lekha Podar. And they are doing something really phenomenal there. You know, with their limited resources, they are trying to collect art from the region, cutting edge art, and show it to the public. I met him 6 years back, and he selected a work of mine which I thought it's not uncollectible. And that gave me an insight to introduce him to come and see all the exciting work that was being produced at the art schools in Pakistan, which nobody would buy and make part of their drawing room. So this is the kind of collection they acquired, works they acquired in the last 4 or 5 years. And then he asked me to curate that show. So in doing so, I learned a lot about the art scene that I'm myself part of. You know, the phenomena of contemporary art from Pakistan is something that I really understood through that exercise. So instead of making or falling for the existing classifications and categories of neo-miniature or Pakistani pop art or Pakistani feminist art, I thought I will just do without all these classifications, and maybe I can just take this creature and animal of contemporary art from Pakistan totally apart, disassemble it all together, just like those film Transformers, and rebuild it into something else that offers viewers a new kind of reading without any kind of narrow viewfinder. Because what happens, it's important to understand whenever these survey shows travel to other parts of the world from so-called emerging markets, emerging scenes, emerging centers. So when Chinese art, Indian art, Pakistani art, Iranian art, Moroccan art, that is shown in other established venues, centers, often there is a viewfinder through which those works are viewed and perceived. So that is something that I have a problem with, because I feel that if you take an artist from India and take his or her work and place in another context without any context of regions or these labels, then the reading will be much broader. So that's now having to face this dilemma. I was curating a show from Pakistan, a work from Pakistan. So it was bound to happen that people who are going to perceive it as a Pakistani show and representative Pakistani show, despite the fact that it was somebody's collection and reflecting somebody's taste. Still, that burden of having to curate a survey show was there. So my way of dealing with that was something that I learned from my own artistic practice, and I just thought I'll just use whatever my strengths are. And instead, as opposed to following some kind of heavy-duty theoretical conceptual premise, I thought, what if I just respect the audience and keep them the most important factor? Talking of audience today, I thought, what if I make it a show which is a very rich visual experience? I built the entire show as a story. So I started off with one work. I took one work and then decided the next work on the basis of the visual connect between the first and the second one. Suppose if there is a simple image of scissors in one painting, then I'll put a next image next to it, simply on the basis of that kind of visual connect. And then regardless whether it's a video art or whether it's a miniature painting, traditional painting, or a sculptural installation. So I completely ignored those classifications and came up with a story as in the form of an exhibition, which people kind of related with. So it wasn't star or artist-specific exhibition. It was a work-specific exhibition, and it was a narrative in the form of works-specific exhibition.
Thank you very, very much, Rashid, Rana. Thank you all very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.